Since the age of emancipation, Black communities have seen ancient Egypt as undeniable evidence of an ancient, great Black civilization that is inspirational for future generations and is valued all over the world. This phenomenon of Black artists claiming ancient Egypt as a source for imagery, for inspiration, empowerment, embellishment, pastiche is an observable phenomenon over a long span of time. So I think many people will come to the museum and recognize images, sites, concepts that are familiar to them, and others will be provoked to reconsider the ways that ancient civilizations impact how we define ourselves and think about our world. Welcome to Flight into Egypt, Black Artists and Ancient Egypt, 1876 to Now. This exhibition is not a straightforward historical show. It's not about the history of ancient Egypt. It's about the history of the reception of ancient Egypt, reflected in the work of Black artists, scientists, religious figures, political figures, and others. I was keen to do an exhibition that was trans-historical and that would address a topic that I was actually thinking about for my entire life. As somebody who grew up in New York, immersed in a community where there are many vernacular expressions of the Black community's feeling of connection to ancient Egypt. So there are works of fine art in traditional mediums like painting and sculpture. There's photography, both artistic and more documentary. There's literature, publications, fashion, music, as well as the sort of apparatus of music, like album covers are a focus, paraphernalia that's used in both religious and fraternal contexts, and lots of historical documentation. And this exhibition, for the first time at the Met, incorporates performance as an integral part of the show. 3 of the works in the exhibition that are considered to be part of the exhibition are actually not at the Met. They're out in New York City in the MTA subway system. 3 permanent MTA artworks by Terry Atkins, Houston Conwell, and Maren Hassinger that have to be seen out in the city. And they too testify to the pervasive influence of ancient Egypt on Black artists. And the presence of these works in the subway system also impacts the daily visual experience of thousands of New Yorkers. I think everyone has a stake in ancient Egypt because it is widely acknowledged as a foundational civilization, but also we can all relate to dreaming about the distant past and how that relates to how we define ourselves today. I'm really thrilled to be joined on this exhibition tour by Fred Wilson and Julie Mehretu, who will discuss their works in the exhibition as well as other things we'll encounter. These were 2 artists with whom I've been in dialogue for quite a while about this project and whose work is really fundamental to my thinking. The first gallery of this exhibition celebrates the work of 3 Black American artists who moved to Europe in the late 19th and 20th centuries and whose encounters with ancient Egyptian art were fundamental to their careers. Henry Ossawa Tanner painted this version of Flight into Egypt in 1923. It depicts the biblical account of the flight of the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and the infant Jesus to Egypt. The subject was a favorite of Tanner's. He painted it 15 times. And for Tanner, it held a lot of personal meaning, being an artist who expatriated from the United States for creative and personal autonomy. Flight into Egypt as a title, as a concept, seemed to me to be a great metaphor for this sustained interest that Black artists and other cultural figures have had in ancient Egypt. As ancient Egypt was a place of refuge for the Holy Family, ancient Egypt has been a creative refuge for Black artists and other cultural figures. Barbara Chase Rebu's Cleopatra's Chair is a work from 1994 by the phenomenal sculptor and poet and author who in 1958 dared to take a trip to Egypt. On that trip, she encountered non-Western art for the first time. After seeing the scale, the elegance of ancient Egyptian art, she described ancient Greek and Roman art as looking like pastry to her. So with those aesthetic principles in mind, from 1973 onward, she embarked on a series of sculptures dedicated to Cleopatra. Cleopatra at the Mall is a 2024 film commissioned by the Met that brings Edmonia Lewis's Death of Cleopatra in 1876 sculpture into the exhibition. The sculpture is very fragile, so the Smithsonian American Art Museum could not lend it, but it was essential that this exhibition feature that work, as it is the oldest major work by a Black and Native American artist about an ancient Egyptian subject. This gallery is called Egyptology and the Color Line. The materials in this gallery reflect the various ways that Black scholars, scientists, archaeologists, and even the entertainer Richard Pryor have worked against the definition of ancient Egypt as a Proto-European culture, asserting creative counter-narratives, pursuing hard research, and rewriting narratives of history to restore Egypt to Africa. George Washington Carver, who is best known for his achievements as an agricultural scientist, in 1923 submitted a US patent application for a pigment that he called Egyptian blue. This fascinating object was the subject of new scientific research as part of this exhibition. I collaborated with a Met objects conservator who also collaborated with colleagues at Tuskegee University and Iowa State University to determine the chemical composition of the pigment that remains in this bottle. And it was discovered that the pigment is technically Prussian blue, but nevertheless, Carver marketing this pigment, which he extracted from Alabama clay, as Egyptian blue is a significant cultural reclamation. Fred Wilson is a leading conceptual artist who provokes deep thought and questioning about systems of knowledge and how information is presented, particularly within the museum context. His work, Gray Area, Brown Version, was a conceptual point of origin for this exhibition. It features 5 replicas of the famed bust of Nefertiti, which is now in the collection of the Neues Museum in Berlin. They range from pale beige to dark brown, and I'm really thrilled to be joined by the artist himself to talk about the origins and history and future of this work. So we're here in the Kings and Queens gallery of the exhibition. There are many works in a variety of static media here that all reflect the tremendous influence of pharaonic imagery on the work of Black artists. And your work, Gray Area, Brown Version, is the first thing that visitors encounter in this space. As we've discussed many times, for me, this work is the conceptual point of origin for this entire project. What was the motivation for making this work?
So it had been rolling around in my head, this piece, in a certain way, rethinking what conversations I'd hear or people's notions and ideas about the ancients, and somehow just lay that out for the viewer, especially African-American viewers, this kind of notion of who they were and how we are related to them, if we are related to them. Also, these conversations by 93 were kind of bubbling up about who they were with the scholars as well as with the public. So I wanted to not answer the question, but just lay out an aspect of the question for people to muse on and think about.
Why did you choose Nefertiti to emblematize this issue when there's so many other ancient Egyptian forms?
There are certain emblematic images that people associate with Egypt. And also, this image is much more readily available. And also, people recognize it. I don't have to say Egyptian head or a queen or anything, because it's just so much understood. And so that begs a question just to kind of discuss what it means. And so it kind of mutates, I guess, as we go through time, which hopefully artwork does, because the world shifts and changes, and there are new realities and new scholarship and all that kind of thing.
It works well with the notion that this exhibition also contains a multitude of Black perspectives on ancient Egypt.
Yes. It's rare to be able to sort of muse on this scale about aesthetic and cultural issues of African Americans.
Heritage Studies is a gallery that looks at 20th and 21st century Egyptian artists' engagement with ancient Egyptian themes. Too often, the perspectives of modern Egyptians have been omitted from Western museological discourse on the reception of ancient Egypt. And this is only a small selection of works that show how Egyptian artists have asserted continuities with ancient Egypt and questioned the stewardship of ancient Egypt in the modern era. This refined sculptural bust is by an artist who is actually one of my colleagues Army of Malik Khalil is a security officer here, and it's called Hope, I Am a Morning Scarab. I met Army when I was going to visit Flight into Egypt in the American Wing, the painting by Henry Oswald Tanner.
Right.
And he showed me this amazing photo of his sculpture studio in Cairo in the early 2000s.
Oh, wow.
I was just flabbergasted at the beauty and the scale of his work and invited him to participate in the exhibition immediately. And he made this work specifically for the show. You've made some work about the sort of role of security officers in museums.
Yes.
Could you riff on that a little bit?
Yeah, I was a guard in my college museum, and I worked there 24 hours some days. I went to museums all my life, but being on this other side and seeing how you're seen or not seen, basically, when you're a guard, was a good experience. So there's quite a lot of twists and turns and things embedded in there that now I will continually think about what is pure form and what is embedded with some other kind of meaning. Certainly the eyes and all that. It's just very engaging. It makes me want to see other works by this artist.
Julie Mehretu is one of the leading painters of her generation. She is Ethiopian and has lived in various parts of Africa, including Egypt, and has a really deep and rich perspective on the symbolic importance of ancient Egypt throughout the African diaspora. So Julie, we're about midway through the exhibition here. This gallery is called Pilgrimage and Fellowship, and it's exploring two strategies that people of the diaspora have used to close the gap between them and the continent, looking at how people have traveled to Egypt, and then social organizations that have developed in the diaspora that are inspired in various ways by ancient Egypt. So Julie, as someone born in Ethiopia, but living and working in the diaspora, what is your relationship to Egypt?
I first went to Egypt when I was 13, 14 with my family, and I'll never forget it. There's something about having been to Giza and having been to see the pyramids and the Sphinx that young and having them be this kind of thing in the imagination, like these kinds of historic trips. Like I grew up with this image, right? Like of Louis Armstrong playing and serenading his wife in front of the Sphinx and the pyramid, the Great Pyramid. And the two of them, like this photo is something I remember from when I was very young. And I guess then as I got older, I started to study more and more Egyptian portraiture. There's this history, this lineage, and I love seeing that moving around the world.
It's fascinating to hear you talk so much about portraits, given that you were known for abstract art.
Yeah, but there's a feeling in those portraits. There's something about the human touch in the portraits that you really sense the breath of a person and that these people lived and how different they were. There's so much abstraction in Egyptian work.
So here we are in the Performance Pyramid, which for the first time at the Met is a space dedicated to performance art within the context of an ongoing temporary exhibition. So this is a space that both displays works of performance art, documents of performances, and other performance-related material. But most importantly, I think, and innovatively for the Metropolitan Museum, we will have a series of 11 dates of performances in this space, staged by artists working in dramatic, dance and movement-based, and musical traditions.
That's going to be amazing. But also, I just love like the color in here, and it feels like a time travel a little bit, like this kind of like futurist.
So since you mentioned the color, this blue is inspired by Egyptian blue, which George Washington Carver submitted a patent to synthesize in 1923. The spectrum of browns that course through most of the gallery come from Fred Wilson's gray area brown version. So all the colors of the exhibition are also thematically tied to the exhibition. But the largest feature of this gallery, the first thing you will notice, is a large theatrical projection of Terry Adkins' 2010 video, Obelisks in Rome. This work documents the 13 obelisks of ancient Egyptian provenance that are dotted throughout the city of Rome, which is actually more than remain in Egypt. And in Rome, of course, they're bracketed by these bases with Latin inscriptions and topped with Catholic ornaments. And so they're completely recontextualized in Rome. It's not meant as a purely art video. It was intended by Adkins to serve as a dynamic backdrop for performances.
What I love so much about seeing the Terry Adkins videos, to me, like, first of all, the whole kind of aspect of bringing this stuff into a contemporary kind of situation is what we're always doing. None of this culture exists without this history. And it's not this continuity because I don't think of history as being so linear. So that's so awesome that it's here. It's not just a historicized kind of moment, but it's like bringing this into the current moment by that form of activation.
We're now in the Space is the Place gallery, the final gallery of the exhibition. And in this gallery, there are several works assembled that similarly meld myth, modern science, and science fiction. I make the argument in this gallery that all the artists represented here, starting with Sun Ra, whose epic 1974 film Space is the Place melds ancient Egyptian aesthetics and modern science and science fiction, you all recognize the inherently cosmic aspirations of ancient Egyptian art. And Julie, it was so important for me for your work to be prominently featured in this gallery next to Sun Ra's Space is the Place, because you're the first person who ever mentioned his name, and it stuck in my head, and you sent me off in a direction that I didn't even know existed. Could you reflect on how Sun Ra's example has affected your work?
Sun Ra was interested in exploding creative kind of thought and invention and pushing that into these kind of inventions of new sonic atmospheric sounds and possibilities, and going back into ancient Egypt as a root of a different knowledge system and understanding the kind of scientific implication embedded in that culture. And then this effort of trying to extrapolate a whole new dimension, because so much of anybody's humanity in this context in the United States, the effort was so extreme to extinguish any form of humanity of any Black American, like in any way. And so when you extrapolate yourself from that and invent outside of that and are insistent on something else, it's a space of full, complete creative liberation, right? To go into this space of saying, I'm extraterrestrial and I'm coming from this cosmic sensibility, and I know that there's this information embedded in this sculpture in the ground. So for me, it was like it participated in this history of something I was interested in with abstraction, what could be possible in abstraction. And one of the reasons I wanted to continue to work in abstraction as opposed to any form of representation is that it allows for this other space and this place of not having to define something but extrapolate something else. And that's kind of what I was also fascinated with in terms of so much of what I saw in ancient Egypt. This exhibition has so many layers, Akili, that you hit on, not just in these different galleries and these different chapters, but in each one of these, there's so many different temperaments and layers of this cosmology that is now a different kind of living cosmology from this ancient past. And congratulations, it's huge.
Thank you. And with that, we're done. This is the first exhibition to really broadly examine over a large period of time this phenomenon of various manifestations of the deep feeling of connection that people in the African diaspora have to ancient Egypt. And it's important that it's happening here at the Met because it's indicative of a new era in this institution and hopefully in the field, where a multiplicity of perspectives that had previously been marginalized are highlighted.